All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back for another awesome episode. We have an incredible guest with us today. We have Dr. Susan Bryan in the house. She is a board certified endocrinologist, Menopause Society certified, scientific researcher, Yale, Dartmouth, and Baylor trained, and she is an excellent midlife and hormone educator. So,
Thank you.
Susan, welcome, or Dr. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Of course, of course. I know we first I guess got introduced through social media because you commented on I think it was either Dr. Carl Nadolski or Spencer Nadolski's, and I'm
Right.
just like I love sifting through their comments. I'm like there are so many medically trained doctors that I could learn from. I'm like I want to reach out. I see you put out really good content. I'm like we got to get her on.
Thanks. Thanks. That's nice. Yes, they have great information and very witty.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's mainly the big reason I wanted to get you on because I know in the fitness space, in the nutrition space, unfortunately, there is a bit of a drought as far as quality information surrounding popular topics like hormones, like GLP-1s, like all these things that so many of our clients have questions on. And then
Yeah.
we take certification courses that are hosted by some people who have no business talking about it. And then there's all
Right.
this misinformation and mismanagement going on. So I want to make sure that everybody listening right now gets a masterclass in exactly what the facts are.
Great. I love
All right.
master classes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
So I think it would be a fun one to start up with, being that this will probably go out either like end of December, early January. And a lot of people are going to be focusing on getting in shape, losing
Oh
weight, and
yeah.
all that good stuff.
Yes, they will
So
be.
when it comes to weight loss in particular
Yeah.
and hormones, when you have somebody come into you to see you and they're like, I really want to lose weight, but I really think my hormones are holding me back. How would you go about that conversation and what would you tell them?
They're probably correct that it is a part of the hormones that are causing the problem, especially women as we get older, definitely in midlife. And if you add to that any family history of type 2 diabetes, any personal history of gestational diabetes, certainly polycystic ovary syndrome, those conditions increase your likelihood of having insulin resistance. And that insulin resistance worsens in perimenopause and menopause as estrogen starts to drop. So I like to give patients kind of the concept of insulin resistance as we inherit a certain amount of insulin resistance from our parents. And it's on in the kind of line of developing type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes in insulin resistance is polygenetic. So there's a whole bunch of different genes that lead to it. So you might inherit one gene or you might inherit 10 different genes. Someday, and probably the not too distant future, we will be checking for a lot of those genes, and that will change how we do a lot of medicine. Um, but they inherit a certain amount. So at baseline, they might have struggled their whole life somewhat with finding some weight gain, or maybe they've been active enough and other things have gone their way that they haven't struggled as much until something, tips the scale, which midlife, perimenopause, menopause is often the thing that does it.
I appreciate
So
the pun.
yeah, right. Thanks. So insulin resistance, you're born with a certain amount of it, and then things in life can worsen insulin resistance, like inactivity. So I see a lot of patients, they maybe they were college athletes and then they had an injury and stopped playing, and all of a sudden they started gaining a bunch of weight. So that changed. Or certain medications can worsen insulin resistance. Lack of physical activity, big change in diet. There's a lot of things, menopause, that can influence that. So insulin is a hormone. And when insulin is on, it's telling your body, store fat. That's what your body naturally does in response. So how could you lose weight if your insulin is high? You can't. You physically can't. And specifically, that causes weight gain around the middle, where all of the cardiac risk is, et cetera. And that you'll see what happens in midlife and menopause. You start putting on the tire around the middle. Well, that's because insulin resistance worsens for everybody. But if you already have genetically some insulin resistance, and that can vary depending on, how many genes and other things in your life, then you can really start. I just saw a patient today who's gained 100 pounds in the past 5 years. And looking at her physically, I can tell she's got lots of skin tags. She has acanthosis nigricans. She's got insulin resistance. No one's ever told her. She didn't know. So
Yeah.
yes, hormones have so much to do with weight gain. And yes, they probably are fighting their hormones. And insulin is one of the most important ones to understand, because I think once people really understand that concept of how do I lower my insulin, which you can do naturally, diet exercise wise, you can do with medications like your GLP-1s, et cetera, that really starts changing. And then of course there's estrogen and progesterone and thyroid, all kinds of hormones that can influence weight, but insulin is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It plays a gigantic role. And I know, again, in this like fitness space and nutrition space, like I've been guilty of this as well, just going hyper on the calories because like if we were to take it to the extreme, you starve somebody, they have insulin resistance, they're still gonna lose weight, but it's not to the point like what people seem to lack to the understanding in is with how people normally eat, with the calories that are required to actually have energy, to actually do the things that you need to do, with somebody struggling with crazy insulin resistance, it's going to be borderline impossible.
Yes. And that is what so many of their family members will often say when they come in, like, they eat less than I do, and yet look at
Yep.
them. And that really is true. And also that goes to the point of the Biggest Loser study, which I think that study is so interesting. And I've seen this in so many patients. So you have these patients with obesity or morbid obesity, and maybe their metabolic rate, maybe they're burning 2,000 calories a day when they come into that TV show, and they are like 300 pounds or whatever, then they lose all that weight through exercise and diet and all the things. And now maybe they are 200 pounds. And it's hard to maintain 6 hours of exercise a day, and you don't have a chef cooking for you. So you go back maybe to 300 pounds. Only now, when they look at your metabolic expenditure, it's not at 2,000 calories, it's only at 1,500 a day. So now, of course, they're going to gain weight, and often more of that weight. And now to maintain, if they try to get back down to maintain, they have to be even lower with calories than they used to. And the drive that we have, ghrelin, leptin, so many of our hormones, our appetite hormones, they don't care if we have morbid obesity. They don't care. They just don't want us to starve, right? And
Mhm.
so as soon as the body starts thinking, oh, I'm starving, this is not good, I'm decreasing my calorie intake, then they start putting out those appetite hormones, which is like almost impossible, so hard for people to overcome those all the time thoughts. I got to eat. What can I eat
But
next? I
it's
got to
just the
avoid that.
willpower. Come on.
Oh, yeah, so hard.
It's
So
like,
hard for
come
that
on.
willpower.
You can't chalk it all up to willpower. There are
Right.
physiological things going on right now.
Right. So yeah, it is complicated. I think that's a big thing for people to understand. And if you've never struggled with weight gain, if you've, been a thin person your whole life and never really thought about it, well, you probably don't have any of these things we're talking about, and you don't understand, you haven't lived that other person's life. So I think a lot of people that speak into this, like, just cut the calories and exercise more, they've never lived with obesity, and they don't understand it actually is super complex metabolically.
Absolutely. And in the research, I guess, are there any actual like studies out there that talk about like rapid weight loss and exactly how fast you can lose without putting yourself in a position where you're putting yourself in that biggest loser situation or you're just unnecessarily sacrificing muscle?
1 pound a week is like a half a pound to 1 pound is beautiful. And usually you won't at that point.
And
Two
that's
pounds,
even with like a population of larger people who would be
yes.
considered obese. Like even at 4, 5, 600 pounds, 1 pound is the gold
Two,
standard.
one is beautiful because you really do want to lose it slowly,
Hmm.
because you're more likely to keep it off if you're. So 1 pound is beautiful, two is fine, but more than two, then long term, more than two, I mean, you'll have weeks when you're a little bit more than that or less than that, but long term, if you're dropping more than that long term, that's just typically a recipe for your metabolism to go in the trash and those appetite hormones to go through the roof. And most of the time, you'll see that's extremely temporary. That's maybe a
Yeah.
month or two. Just the body just can't maintain that amount of, and then absolutely normally when you lose weight, you lose about 75% fat, 25% muscle-ish. The
I'm so
worst,
glad you said that ratio because I could not find it. I'm like, it's a
yeah,
percentage. I just don't
that's what it
know.
is. That's for
Okay.
that's for like diet, exercise, in general, healthy. Because you can imagine, I always like to tell people, like, you can imagine doing a plank at 400 pounds versus 100 pounds. It's going to be so much harder to maintain that. You're working hard. So of course you're going to burn more at that 400, but and have more muscle with that. But so 75% fat loss is typical. The worst studies we've seen, like, was a Wegovy study where they lost 60% fat, 40% muscle. Well, that's getting quite a bit of muscle
Okay.
loss there.
So that's where Peter Attia got his number from.
I don't know. I didn't see that, but
Okay.
that's
There
that happened.
he was catching a lot of slack because he was putting out there that you lose an absurd amount of muscle when you hop on GLP-1s. So I was like, where the heck did he get that from? Now we know.
Yeah, that was
And
the worst.
yeah, and since we're on this topic, when it comes to muscle, is there any correlational studies or causational studies that show the impact that muscle loss has on metabolism and metabolic burn?
Yes, absolutely. You lose that muscle. That's part of the biggest loser phenomenon because they have lost muscle. And a lot
Yeah.
of that biggest loser is a rapid weight loss. So you're seeing much more than 2 pounds a week. So you are losing a lot of muscle. And so that is part of the problem. Now they regain weight, they've regained fat, they have less muscle at that same 300 pounds. It's more fat than muscle. And so, of course, now metabolic, that's part of the issue with why they cannot maintain. And muscle is definitely important when you think about insulin resistance. Building muscle lowers insulin resistance. Muscle is like this beautiful gateway for just opening up the stores it will open up your cells for glucose so you don't have to have as much insulin to open them. So muscle development is so important for not only the metabolic rate, but also insulin resistance.
Yeah, because I know there were some dogmatic beliefs like 20, 30 years ago, you got to earn your carbs, but there is a little bit of truth to that, clearly.
Yeah, definitely. The more muscle you have, the more typically you can have of those carbs because and also there is research too. This is really interesting that not just like muscle growth, but movement. Whenever you move your muscle, so not just building a butt, but cardiovascular exercise, walking, running, whatever. Even when you just start the first minute, you start to open up those cells to accept the glucose and lower the insulin. So that's the really cool thing that people don't understand, I think, about metabolism is that on the negative side, a little bit of weight gain, a little bit of extra fat, et cetera, really does worsen things metabolically. That is very true. But on the positive side, once you start going, I like to tell people, like, we're kind of, circling in the trash here. But once we can start reversing and coming out of that, then it's like this beautiful backward spiral thing. So a little bit of weight loss has a tremendous amount effect on metabolism. So both, it hits both ways. It is, you can go down the negative road, but you can also turn things around, and muscle and movement are two great ways to do that.
Yeah, so like right now, being the beginning of the year, or like tail end of the year, getting any form of exercise, even if your nutrition is
Yes.
not on point, any exercise is
Yes.
gonna have benefit.
Absolutely. And there have been so many research studies done for diabetes, for example, with insulin resistance, and all of them basically show it doesn't matter what you do. You can do weight training, you can do walking, you can do swimming, you can be biking, you can do, I mean, there you so anything, aerobic, anaerobic, some mixture of those. Absolutely anything you do is beneficial. So there's really not one that's so much better than the other as far as metabolism. They both have a role.
Yeah. And since we're on the topic of exercise and muscle, I'd love to pick your brain on creatine because I know it's a hot topic now and for good reason because it's awesome. But how do you see it as far as how you would position it to a patient, like why they should take it or why they maybe should not take it?
Yeah, well, midlife is a time to consider it, if you haven't done it before. Definitely the thinking previously had been more like, I don't know, bodybuilders or, high school football players or something,
They
this.
are the guinea pigs.
Yeah,
They serve a
right.
very good purpose.
Yes. But now we are definitely seeing with more studies that it is beneficial in the muscle recovery area. And so, what it has been shown so far is actually they've also looked at midlife women and women in menopause, showing the benefit there. There's less studies, with women than men, but it's beneficial for recovery. It's beneficial to help you maybe have a little bit more effort while you're lifting weights or doing your exercise. So maybe you can put forth more effort because there's more benefit inside the muscle. And then also you recover quickly so that you can get right back at it again. So I think 95% or so is in muscle, but 5% is in the brain. And so there's also, there's a lot of brain fog, brain change. That's such a common thing in menopause. And they're doing those studies with athletes where they're looking at like post-concussion recovery and really interesting head trauma use of creatine, where maybe it also improves that recovery and function. So I think it's definitely worth trying it. It's like 1 scoop a day, and you can take
Yeah.
it before, during, after, or whatever. It seems pretty, as long as you're getting it from a reputable place. Don't want to just be getting it from anywhere, and you're taking the right form of it. It seems like it's a good thing to consider adding, especially with kind of the sarcopenia or muscle mass loss that we experience in midlife and beyond.
Absolutely. And as a former football player who has had at least 2 to 3 concussions, that makes me feel so good that I've been
Yeah,
taking creatine all this time. So
yeah.
that is very, very good to hear. But that's awesome for women in midlife in particular, because I think for the longest time, I remember when I was younger trying to convince my mom to get creatine for me. She's like, "Is this a steroid?" So there's
Yes,
been a
no, it's not
little
a
bit of
steroid.
apprehension.
Right. And it's not bad for you. I mean, they've done so many different studies because they used to think it was a steroid, which it's definitely not. I'm the steroid expert. It is not a steroid. And it's not hard on the kidneys. That's another kind of erroneous thought. If you have
Yeah.
normal kidney function, you should be able to take it normally. If you have decreased kidney function, then you want to talk to your nephrologist or kidney specialist and probably be on less of a dose just because your kidneys have to process it, but it's not harmful.
Yeah. And speaking of the kidneys in particular, it's kind of wild that now they're finding out about like high protein diets being beneficial for people who have kidney issues, where for the longest time it's like, no, 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 they cannot process this. They cannot handle this.
Right. Yes. We have a lot of new thoughts as far as protein and the kidneys go, for sure. The kidneys can do a lot of great things, and a lot of those fears I think come from uh, history of people with failing kidneys, kind of at the end, and just kind of potential issues that aren't really there.
Yeah, exactly. And while we're on that topic, when it comes to the whole like kidneys being one of the things that is great for detoxifying our body, I know one of the big topics in circulation right now are the toxins, the poisons in our food and everything. So, if somebody was like, "Oh my God, I can't even go to the grocery store because all this food is so horrible for me," like what would you say as far as like I usually go down the rabbit hole of like, you don't need to detox your body or anything because you got skin, you got liver, you got your kidneys,
Yeah.
you got your lungs. Like, what would you say to somebody who's genuinely concerned that like they're poisoning their themselves and their family?
I think that often it's kind of like barking up the wrong tree. Like you can spend a lot of time and energy and money focusing on trying to get away from any chemical or processed thing ever, and it's going to take all of your life and energy. And instead, I like the concept of crowding out unhealthy food choices with healthy ones. So instead of being so, worried that any of that is going to affect your body, why don't you try adding those healthy foods in, like getting those servings of vegetables, looking at your fiber, making sure you're getting good fiber in, watching your sugar content. There's so many things that you can do, looking at good, like probiotic foods and that sort of thing. So I like the concept more, instead of like being scared of certain type of foods, fill your diet full of great, healthy, nutritious. And usually once you've done that, the other things kind of, there might just be for fun or, around the periphery, but it's not such a big deal. Sometimes when we vilify something so much, I think you lose all the other things because you're so focused
Exactly.
on that. And there's definitely no reason to detoxify or, none of that stuff works. I think that's just a lot of times I see patients that they're so unhealthy. They're not walking, they're not doing the simple things, but they have bought $500 in supplements on the internet for detoxification or whatever that has no benefit to them. And the simple thing that we could really make a difference, they're ignoring that for the crazy claim that they've seen online or something. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot getting lost as far as the big rocks that make the biggest difference. And if we're being honest, if you do have these things that are poison for that they're labeling, if you have it once in a while, your body's going to filter it out and you will be
Right.
totally fine. Like
Yes.
I like taking it to the other extreme. Like there are people who are lifetime smokers that last a pretty long time that have no
Yeah, there
business
are.
lasting a long time.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
there
I
are.
mean, clearly our bodies are resilient, and that's
Yes.
literally putting tar into your body. I think
Right.
a little bit of candy, not gonna
Yeah.
kill you.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that are able to live a healthy lifestyle, like you and me, there is room at the edges of our diet for having fun or silly kind of treats, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're so, diligent about everything, then you end up falling off completely because you can't stick with it.
Or you go down the rabbit hole of causing so much stress that it's undoing all these healthy changes, which I'd
Yes.
love to dive into is the whole concept of stress. So when
Yes.
you talk about it with patients as far as stress techniques to reduce the amount, because like let's be real, stress can play a gigantic role when it comes to hormonal health.
Oh yeah.
What are your favorite things to recommend that have worked really well with your patients?
Okay, well, I'll tell you that, but let me first talk about stress just for a second.
Yeah.
So, just to kind of give you the idea of how bad it could be. So, stress increases cortisol, right? Is from our adrenal glands. Cortisol is life-saving for us. We need it when we're going through an operation, if we're in a car accident, if we're
Or
really sick
waking up.
in bed. Yeah, waking up in the morning. Cortisol helps our blood pressure come up. It helps our glucose come up. It helps us get out of bed. It helps our organs function basically. And without cortisol, if I just took your cortisol, if I just took out your adrenal glands and didn't give you any cortisol back, you'd be dead within 24 hours. So we have to have cortisol to live. So there's a healthy amount of cortisol. But the what is unhealthy is when our cortisol is kind of elevated all of the time, which stress absolutely can do. Depression is another thing that really elevates cortisol. Alcohol, interestingly, is another thing that elevates cortisol. So there's something in our specialty in endocrinology called Cushing's disease. It's this kind of rare tumor. We see it a lot, but a tumor of the pituitary or of the adrenal glands. And it is a tumor that releases basically cortisol. So you have so much cortisol in your body that you have in very high levels. It causes you like 100-pound weight gain in a year, wouldn't be unusual. Big red stretch marks on your belly, swelling in your legs, diabetes diagnosis, high blood pressure, all of these really bad things. That's taken to the
So it's
extreme.
pretty noticeable. It's not like, oh, I think I
Yes.
have this. And it's like, no, you probably don't.
It's pretty noticeable, although
Yeah.
there is in the adrenal tumor, it's those are slower growing. So sometimes
Ah.
that the pituitary is really rapid, so it's very noticeable. But the adrenal, as the tumor grows, it slowly produces more. So that one actually can get missed. We screen for that a lot in like obesity or diabetes. Some diabetics actually have Cushing's disease and it's been missed because it's this slow growing adrenal nodule.
Oh,
But
okay.
there's something called pseudo Cushing's, which is that they have such high levels of cortisol that it looks like a tumor, but there is no tumor. It's from depression, severe depression, or alcoholism. So that is just kind of taken to the extreme. You can see how bad a really high cortisol levels are and how like depression at the worst is like the worst stress on the body and alcoholism. So you can look just like you have this tumor. It can be so bad. So taken not to that extreme, but you can see how stress and depression sort of things can cause that higher cortisol and maybe not as bad of that weight gain or diabetes, et cetera, but on the way. So high cortisol constantly is not a healthy thing. Like at
Yeah.
night
And
when we sleep.
I'm so glad you brought this up because it's really feeding into the fact that this stuff is multifactorial. It's not a simple
Yes.
TikTok video or Instagram video that's like,
No.
you want to bring your cortisol down? Do this. You want to get rid
Right.
of obesity? Do
No.
this. No, there's a million things going on.
So here's another interesting thing about cortisol. So normally you said cortisol goes up in the morning. That's exactly right. It peaks in the morning to help us get out of bed. But overnight, like go to bed at 10 o'clock, your cortisol goes really low. And it's really low all night long. Why? Because that helps us sleep. And we don't need it. We don't need to be up running around. So we don't need it. And again, we don't want a bunch of cortisol. So overnight it's really low. What happens to people with insomnia or people who work at night? Or people like in menopause have all these sleep issues. Well, they're up at night, and so their cortisol is going up. And that may not be such a bad thing if it's one night or two nights, but if it's for 6 months, well, that's a problem. That then you start getting these other things that I said you can see with Cushing's. So that's how sleep can play into that too. So naturally, ways to deal with this cortisol are the same ways that you deal with stress, depression, alcohol use, basically. Ideally, you cut out the alcohol because that's not helping you at all. Deal with the depression. So, is this clinical depression that needs to be treated? Do you need to see a therapist? Do you need to see a psychiatrist? Do you need to be on those medications? Those you treat the underlying issue. And then stress, identifying what is it that's causing you stress, journaling, also seeing a therapist, not wonderful activities that you can do just to lower that cortisol naturally are yoga. That's beautiful for lowering cortisol, meditation, any of those really calming activities, even kind of that slow walking, the slow activities like that, that also lowers cortisol through the mechanisms of calming, relaxation, etc. So those things are really helpful for the more mild stress, but the worse that is, then the more interventions you're going to need. But those are so beneficial because if you can get at that underlying cause and fix that, then once that cortisol comes down, a lot of things start falling into place.
That's very, very helpful information. I know there's definitely some people that are thinking right now, all right, I got to book a like consultation with a therapist or like get this under control. And I think this whole mental health conversation is so big because a lot of people are going to jump into exercise, jump into nutrition, and they just can't stick with it. And they're like, what gives? And it's like you snack every time that you have a depressive episode or you emotionally eat all the time. And it's like we're not attacking the right thing.
Right. Yeah. Even the night shift sort of work. That is
Yeah.
something I've had a lot of, or just such, I have so many patients who have such a stressful work environment. And if once we get them to change their job, I mean, it's a pretty dramatic thing, but it's just like it starts clicking. Oh, what's changed when I see them back? Oh, well, I changed my job and it's so much more calm, or, I could add in walking. I went to the day shift instead of the night shift. So those getting the kind of those big ticket items can make naturally this really huge difference.
Yeah, and I know it can be a really like a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, like myself as a coach, or I'm assuming you as a doctor. It's like, I honestly just wish you would change careers. This would make your health
Yeah,
so much
right.
better. But it's
Right.
like, if somebody does really truly value their health, it could be worth just having this in the back of their
Yeah.
head of like, hey, this is really making life harder and it is trimming years off my life.
Right. Yes. And I've had a lot of patients decide to retire, from their regular job earlier and then just switch careers, do something different. And then their health just improved so much. They didn't need to stay in that same, they had enough saved or, they can make enough in this other profession. So sometimes it's getting, you're locked into that mindset that I have to keep doing what I'm doing just because I've always done it. And then kind of maybe opening up, well, what would it look like if we did something different? So stress, cortisol, that's huge. And you'll see that, I think, sometimes even some of those shows, like people lose weight and then they get to a plateau and they just can't, then they go to the therapist, right? Then
Yep.
they deal with that mental health and then they have that where they can continue to lose weight. So there really is something metabolically, scientifically accurate about that.
Absolutely. And I think also a very underrated aspect in all this too is the fact that when it comes to stress and you have all this stuff going on, people don't realize when you are in a caloric deficit, that's also a stressor on your body.
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
S-
Absolutely, it
So it's
is.
like this stress bucket is not just full, it is overflowing.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you'll see that in patients. Like I have patients we have a huge bike race in Kansas, is like a 200-mile off-road dirt ride. I have patients that have gained weight while training for that, which training for that, I've done it as part of that race. It's just even the shorter one is super difficult, but it's so stressful to the body and their life that it ends up actually not being such a positive thing. And if they would have maybe just done the 50-mile or something, then that would have. So sometimes choosing something different that might not necessarily be what you think it is. I've seen that in marathon runners too.
I was
Um,
just going to say all the marathon runners listening right now that are struggling with weight loss,
uh,
just a half marathon,
right.
maybe a 5K might be more up your alley if your goal is to
Yeah.
lose weight. Just saying.
Right. What's your goal? I did a marathon too, and I for sure know like my appetite was through the roof and the physical trauma, some of the stuff I was dealing with. So yes, that's right. If your goal is weight loss, it depends what your goal is. If it's weight loss, it might not be the best choice.
Yeah. And honestly, like as far as the verbiage around that, I've caught myself lately. I'm just like, not everybody's trying to lose weight. It's so important to just preface
That's right.
because I think a lot of times it is very easy to get caught up in the weight loss language and all this stuff. And I'm assuming like when it comes to practitioners, it could be very common too, where it's like you can potentially fall into that as well, right? Where it's like we got to lose weight. And it's like, that's not the goal for them at
Right.
least.
That's right. That's right. And it totally depends on the person. Now, for me, in endocrinology and in the menopause provider world, that's often a reason that they're coming to me. But,
Yeah.
but not always, but more often they've tried and feel like no one's helping them in the medical world.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, honestly, I wish more like clients or people just listening to the podcast who do struggle with this stuff and do think it is their hormones, go see your doctor. It's like, go see your endocrinologist if you can,
Right.
because you're going to get an actual answer from that rather than some random protocol that somebody swears works that
Yeah.
is in no way medically trained,
Right.
which
Yeah.
unfortunately happens.
That's one of the reasons that I got on social media is because so many of my patients were bringing me this stuff, and I'm like, "No," like, so then I researched who is that saying that. Like, I don't like, why are they talking? Why are they talking about it? They don't.
Yep.
They're
Because
saying completely wrong information.
Yeah, because I think especially during COVID, it ramped up, but it's created this false equivalency of practitioners and these influencers being at the same level. And it's
Yes.
like, all right, if these people spitting this stuff on social media were to walk into a room full of doctors and say what they're saying, they would get laughed out of the room.
Yes, absolutely. That's
It's
right.
just it's wild. And then everybody like they make money on it. So they're like, hey, makes money, makes sense, right?
Yes, but you're right. And when I hear some people talking about things, I realize even what they're saying, I realize like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Like that's not right. And you dig just a tiny bit below the surface and realize that there's not any of that underlying knowledge. So yeah, I think you really do have to be careful. And the biggest issue I've seen with my patients is just them spending money on a bunch of stuff that didn't work, and it's
Yep.
just frustrating for me because they don't have a lot of money to spend. So
Exactly. People are struggling to pay rent, but they're dishing out hundreds of dollars on supplements that they don't need and could potentially harm them.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
very
And
frustrating.
but this is part of the reason that I wanted to bring you on, and I want to bring a bunch of doctors onto here because the more that you hear people like Dr. Brian talking and understanding this is what a professional sounds like, it's like you can really weed out people that are saying stuff online and be like, wow, they really don't know what the heck they're talking about. But a lot of people don't get that exposure. Like, I'm very, very fortunate to have a fiance who is a medical doctor, and I listen to her 24/7 talk about things. And I'm like, okay, when I hop on social media, I'm like, well, this person's full of shit. This person doesn't know what they're talking about because
Yeah,
it's that easy. But
yeah, it
a
is
lot of
easy.
people don't get that exposure because
That's right.
when you yourself talk, like there's tons of context, there's tons of nuance, it's situation specific, and it
Yes.
paints a full picture, not a absolutist, just do this.
Yes. Yes. I totally hear you. And that's what one of the things that frustrates me so much about information. It's absolute and there's no nuance. Nothing in medicine is like that. I mean, it's so nuanced. It's so specialized. It's so specific to a person. So yes, that you start getting in trouble when you say always do this, never do this, that's a problem.
Yeah. And if it happens to be a shirtless teenager in their parents' kitchen, then you could just chalk that up as don't need to listen.
Right.
There's
Definitely
there's
not going
too
to be
many.
beneficial.
There's too many. Or if they're shirtless in a grocery store. Obviously not a good source of info.
I have not seen those, so apparently that doesn't come on my
Oh.
feed.
And unfortunately, the one of the main culprits in that is a psychiatrist. So he has MD next
Oh,
to his name, and it's
oh,
so bad. I'm not going to
oh,
put his name out there because I don't want
oh,
anybody looking
don't.
him up. But anyway,
That's funny.
one of the topics I wanted to work into the conversation as well is the whole concept of social connection because I think
Oh,
especially
yeah.
coming off of COVID and we're still kind of like lingering from that and we're so
Yes.
online centric now like as
Yes.
we're having a Zoom conversation.
Right.
But what kind of a role does that play in people's overall health and
Huge.
what does the research say as far as all of that?
There was just that longevity, Harvard, that long study where they found like what people that lived decades and decades, made it to their 90s and hundreds and still had vitality in health. What was the thing that was similar with all of them? And the number one thing was social connections. And that makes sense. It completely makes sense to me. And my patients that I see that have a family or church community or neighborhood community, something around them where they're socializing regularly, they're getting out and doing things publicly, they're involved in some volunteer, they're somehow connected to a community. They do so much better than patients who are isolated. And that's exactly what COVID absolutely showed us is you isolate these older patients and they die. They do not do well with isolation. And of course, that's part of this younger, I have 5 kids, a couple of them are adults, and they grew up in this COVID kind of era and social media isolation sort of thing where they have lost some of that connection, but that is something they're going to have to find and embrace and to live a long, healthy life. And I'm an introvert, so I understand the struggle sometimes to put yourself in community, but that is the social connections are, according to that long-term Harvard study, the number one thing that you can do for your health.
Yeah, as a fellow introvert, I totally respect that. I'm over here collecting tokens as we speak. But
Something
what
interesting, they have shown that hormonally, our being around other people actually influences our hormones. So cortisol, and talking about stress, cortisol is one of those things that has been shown in studies to improve when you have good social connection, when you're around other people.
Yeah, and I know somebody brought this up like a week or two ago. I wish I knew who to give credit to, but I would love, I don't know how this would pass an ethics board, but I would love a study somehow to see if getting together once or twice a week to have drinks with friends would be healthier overall than somebody being super duper healthy all alone.
Yes, right. That's a good question. That's a really good,
I mean, I
yes.
would volunteer. I'll be in the drinking group. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Well, and in person, like you're saying, that is important. That in-person connection is in these studies more important than connecting online. I mean, this is better than nothing. But and I feel like that with telemedicine too. I have a portion that's telemedicine, but I used to think I before COVID, I was one of only 2 providers in our whole organization, which is very big, that did telemedicine. So it was kind of like on the cutting edge before COVID. And because I thought one day, I think, then I love to travel and then I can do medicine anywhere. And then I actually did telemedicine all the time in COVID. And so I realized my connection with a patient is so much better in person. But telemedicine is better than nothing for sure. And there's a place for it, absolutely. And I still do it. But when I can touch that person, when I can look at, I just get so many more cues from them, how they're feeling, how they're responding to some question. Of course,
Yeah.
I can look at them and touch them.
I mean, a
Um,
physical assessment is like one of those things
Huge.
that tells you so much, right?
Huge. And I find things on physical. Like I had a patient in COVID that I saw her online for a year. Actually, I see her for osteoporosis, nothing to do with her thyroid, but after she came back after COVID and I did another physical, I always checked the thyroid in the neck, just whatever. And I felt a mass in her neck. And that had developed during COVID. And she had wanted to do another telemedicine, but I tried to tell everybody if it's been a year, please come back in person, then we can do telemedicine again. And turned out
Yeah.
she had metastatic thyroid cancer. And so those are the kind of things that, and she was very healthy actually otherwise, and she hadn't noticed it. So there's a benefit of getting touched, getting looked at in person, and that's also those social connections, being physically touched and hugged socially, going out to drinks, putting the phones down, looking in people's eyes, huge. Oxytocin is a bonding hormone. Mamas get it with their babies. We actually get it with each other when we are together in person. And that is a happy, calming hormone.
Absolutely. And I think another big factor too in that is having a purpose because I know one of the great books out there, Tribe, like I know they talked about a certain group of people, I think it was out in like Japan, but basically they were noticing a phenomenon where once they retired from military service and they were kind of basically put out to pasture, they died within like 2 years, even though they were like the pinnacle of health when they retired, it just declined so rapidly because mentally, physically, spiritually, they had no purpose whatsoever. So being part of these communities and these groups and having some sort of a role is also gigantic with all of
Right.
this.
And in psychology, that retirement age is psychologically the age where you turn around and look back at your life and you start to impart wisdom about your life to the younger generations. And if you're not connected socially, if you're isolated, that's not going to happen. So psychologically too, you're missing that part of your purpose, which is very natural in the progression. So yes, using being socially connected, adding in volunteer activities or service community, huge. I actually talk to my patients when they're going to retire, like, what's your plan? Where are you going to volunteer? What's your
Yeah.
exercise plan going to be? Et cetera.
That's huge. I've honestly, that's the first I'm hearing of somebody like in any field that deals with a retired population talking about like the plan. So, like, I'd love to go down that
Yeah.
rabbit hole a little bit. When it comes to somebody who is retirement age, what are some checklist things that you're like, all right, let's get this down, let's get that down. So that way you're not just retiring and we're putting you out to pasture, like you are going to thrive later in life.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I see. So I see patients, if they come up with a plan, if they have a purpose, if they know what they're going to do beforehand, then like they do great. They're happy, they're, all the good things. If they don't, what they'll often come back and say is they're depressed. They don't have any friends. They've gained weight usually. Their health is worse. A lot of health things are worse. And they just don't have like a purpose to live anymore. And their days, if they don't structure their days, they'll just say, I don't know, all of a sudden it's like bedtime and I don't even know what I've done all day long. It's just like the day just, goes by without a plan. But my patients are like in their 90s and they come in and they hop up on the table and they tell me about the latest news. I'm like, okay, so what's your exercise regimen? And they'll say, Mondays I go to the Y and I have my swimming class. Tuesday, they have the whole plan. So from that, I've learned like, okay, when people are telling me they're going to retire, here's what I say. I say, first of all, what's your health care insurance going to look like? So, because sometimes, and I've had a lot of patients do this, when they start looking at that, they realize, oh my word, I'm not going to be able to afford my medications on whatever this another health plan is going to be that I'm going to go on. And so I've had several patients that have stayed where they are, but started working part-time, but kept their benefits or changed the position so they can work from home and have more flexibility, but keep their benefits. So looking at benefits is important. And, there's all kinds of free insurance companies that will for free go through what your medicines are and who your doctors are and all and find the best healthcare plan for you. So that's huge.
Hmm.
The second is exercise. So again, seems like if they don't have a plan to exercise, the day just goes by completely and they haven't done anything. And I've done that too. I understand, you get a day off and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't get anything done. It's
Yep.
okay once in a while, but not every day in
Yeah. Too much
retirement.
time can be a curse.
Yeah. So having them lay out, I want to know like what days are you going to exercise, what time, where are you going to go? And ideally some of that is out of the house, engaging at the Y or, going on walks with friends or whatever. So healthcare insurance plan for that, exercise plan, and then volunteering. I try to get them to think about what's maybe once a week, what's a place that something that you love, something you've always wanted to do. Maybe it's completely unrelated, like volunteer at the library. Or I have a patient who just retired from the library and he's like, I'm not volunteering there anymore, but I might volunteer at the hospital because he's
Yeah.
had so many medical stuff himself. So do volunteering like that. And then getting a dietary sort of guideline for yourself. Because a lot of times when people go from a structured work environment to being home a lot of time, then they're around food all of the time. And then they just kind of don't even realize it, but they're snacking and not
Yeah.
getting, their goals. So they're trying to set out and trying to plan for that in the future. So doing those things, I really feel like helps people prepare and do well. Otherwise, you've seen this phenomenon too. I'm sure like people die a couple of years after retirement and their health just, it's like you worked all of these years and you're not even able to enjoy it. What now these
Yeah.
best years of your life?
It's kind of sad because it's like there are a lot of people in the workforce right now that are like, just wait until I get to retirement, wait until I get there. And
Yeah.
then it's like, and it hits and you're just like, this is it.
That's right. That's right. So finding like your mission or your purpose is huge for that. I love the FIRE community. I don't know if you know anything about the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early.
No, I would love to hear about
You
that.
should dive into the FIRE community. It's so cool. I'm going to my first retreat this summer in Colorado, but it's about financial independence. So like not taking out huge debt and paying off your stuff. But the main thing that they do is like, what do you want to do with your life? It's not getting stuck in some job. It's not working just to pay the bills. It's like, what fires you up? What motivates you? And then build your life around that. So trying to implement that with my patients in their future is like, okay, well, maybe that is what retirement looks like for all the other friends, but what is it going to look like for you? And I tell you, just this week, I have two elderly patients, and they're taking their second trip across from Kansas, driving to Alaska, all the
That sounds like
Alaska.
fun.
Yeah, and this is the second time they did. They take a ferry from with their little truck all the way up. I mean, we wouldn't believe the patients in Kansas that are traveling all around the world. Woman, she's in her 80s and she just trekked for 3 weeks across Africa. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but like you can do that. And I think a lot of times people get the misconception, like I have diabetes, even on insulin or type 1 or whatever. I can't do that. I can't travel. Like, why can't you? People do all kinds of stuff with all kinds of diseases. Like, why can't you do that? Let's dream big. So I love to kind of encourage people, like, push yourself, do something new. That's good for your brain too. Doing something
Yeah.
new or different, fantastic for those neurons in the brain.
Oh yeah, we're talking neuroplasticity to the fullest.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
100%.
Love that. Love that. There's going to be a lot of people joining fire after this.
I
It's going to be a
you
good
you really
time.
should read about it. It's phenomenal. They just had one in Bali. That's a
Yeah.
future goal of mine. Going to one of
Okay.
those conferences in Bali.
Yeah, I know, at least in my area of nutrition and fitness, you hear Bali and you're like, all right, who's hosting the yoga retreat?
Right.
Who's gonna be talking about their meditation retreat?
That's
Okay.
right. That sounds like it. Yes.
Yep. I know, I forget who was talking about it. Again, I am horrible at giving credit where credit is due, just out of pure memory problem. But somebody was like, yeah, you go to Bali and you will meet, like, if you live there for a significant amount of time, you will meet a handful of people who make absurd amounts of money, but you have no idea what they do.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard that too.
You're just
Yes.
like, so what's your job description? And they'll tell you, and
Yes.
you're just like, I still don't know. But
Uh, on
interesting.
on the neuroplasticity, that makes me think about hormone sort of things, So neuroplasticity in hormone health is actually extremely important. Diabetes, I'm sure you've heard this, but they call Alzheimer's, right? Like type 3 diabetes,
Oh,
because
I've
it's
actually never heard that.
yes, yes. So the risk of Alzheimer's is so much higher in type 2 diabetics.
Oh.
Yep. And so the things that it's kind of like neuroinflammation because there's insulin resistance in the brain. And
Hmm.
so it's part of this inflammation. And that's, I think, one reason why the GLP-1 medications have been shown in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's to decrease neuroinflammation and actually help those dendrites and the neurons to stay beautiful and spread out and connected.
Wow.
So yes, so there's a lot of connection to hormones, and that's like going on hormone therapy early in if you go through a premature menopause helps decrease the risk of Alzheimer's. Same thing, estrogen is involved in brain health as well. So I love
That's
neuroplasticity.
that is really, really cool information.
Yeah,
And even more reason for somebody listening right now to take these tips and really use them because it does have a gigantic role. You can't put off your health until it's too late, or you can, but it's not going to be a fun time.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And if you wait until for a lot of these hormone things, if you wait until you're retired, for example, before you think about it for the first time, a lot of damage has been done. A lot of years has been passed. Not that you can't improve things still, but even better yet, when you're in your 30s or 40s or whatever, to understand these things and then age, with better health, and you'll be in an even better spot. I really see this now with the GLP-1s and the dual incretins, Mounjaro, Zepbound, all of that. The way that we've treated people for diabetes and obesity, et cetera, is so much better. Literally, I literally feel like I see people aging in reverse. Literally, it's so much better.
Yeah.
And it's profound because the natural history of diabetes is to worsen over time. You lose more, you get more worsened vision, your kidneys get worse, you gain more weight because insulin has caused weight gain, and ultimately they end up on insulin because we don't have other good treatments. And it's totally different now. People are losing weight, they have less inflammation, so they're more active. Their brains are improving with this medication. I mean, it's just like it's beautiful. I love it. So
Yeah.
it's a really exciting time to be a a patient and a provider because we have so much more to offer people now. So it's sad when patients aren't taking advantage of that. If they're having these issues, go to the doctor. If you don't get someone to listen to you, go to another doctor. Don't just stop with one. Be your own advocate, because really there's amazing diet, exercise, medications that can make a big difference in your life.
Yep. Yep. And I apologize. I was muting myself because I'm like witnessing a monsoon right now. So I
Oh,
hope that the microphone is not
I
catching
didn't
it.
hear it. I didn't hear any of it.
Oh my God. I wish I could turn the camera. It looks like I'm
Wow.
in Forrest Gump when he's like, it's raining sideways. But but no, this is really incredible information. And I know like you are part of Menopause Society, and I'm
Yep.
just curious for anybody listening right now who does want to find a provider that can steer them in the right direction. What are some resources that you would leave people with and say, I would check this out or I would check that out to find somebody in your area?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're a woman in your 40s, a lot of the people that are certified menopause providers are well versed in GLP-1s, in menopause hormone therapy, in a lot of these things. I'm a certified menopause provider and I'm an endocrinologist, but you could be an OBGYN, you could be a general primary care doctor. But if you want to find someone in your area, you just look at, the Menopause Society, which they used to be called the North American Menopause Society, or NAMS. Now it's just Menopause Society. Go to the Menopause Society. There's a part of that website where you can search for a practitioner in your area. And that's how you can find someone close to you. And so there's not a ton of us, but there's enough that typically you can find someone if you're willing to drive, maybe an hour or two. So I think that's a really good resource and place to start for women in their midlife.
Love that. And if any of the Fit 40 clients are listening, it's in your client resources, the NAMS, the NAMS
Okay.
research or lookup. And for anybody who's not, it's going to be in the show notes, in the description. So you guys don't even have to go look for it. It's right there. Click, find somebody near you, and make sure you get the care that you deserve. Because I know I'm technically menopause certified coach, but that doesn't mean I can do the same level as Dr. Brian can or somebody else who is medically trained. So obviously, if you have a trainer, a nutrition coach, it helps to have that, but nothing beats seeing your doctor. So don't replace one with the other, please.
Right. They both work well together.
Yes, the complementary works the best. So
Yes,
if you
I
can
agree.
get both, get both.
I agree completely.
Yep. All right. Well, along with that, if somebody heard you during this talk and they're like, wow, Dr. Bryan is awesome. She does a really good job telling it how it is. And I know her social media reflects this. Where can they find you?
So on social media, I think I'm Susan Bryan, MD. I think that's how you find me. Brian, like a boy's name. And
It's
then
not the
I'm
cool spelling. It's okay,
No, it's just
people.
a very normal spelling.
Some of
And
us are more fortunate.
yes, that's right. And I'm in Topeka, Kansas with Stormont, if you're in Kansas. So
Awesome. Awesome. Again, that'll be in the show notes. It'll be in the description. Wherever you're watching or listening, it will be there. So, Dr. Brian, thank you so much for
yeah, thanks,
popping in,
Brian.
giving us such great information. More people need to hear practitioners, physicians just like yourself giving all
Thanks.
the quality advice. So, thank you again.
Thanks, Brian. Yep. Appreciate it.
You're
Have a good day.
welcome. All right. You too.
Okay.
And
Bye.
everybody, I'll see you next time. But until then, go kick some ass. Later.
Later.